This is Pripyat, Ukraine, population 0, once home to 50,000 people, families, children, dreams. On April 25, 1986, this was one of the most modern cities in the Soviet Union. 36 hours later, it became a graveyard. What happened here didn't just kill a city, it poisoned a continent, and the people in power tried to hide it all. To understand the disaster, you need to understand what Pripyat was. Built in 1970, it was a Soviet showcase, a city designed to prove that communism worked. Average age, 26. Brand new apartments, schools, shopping centers, an amusement park set to open on May Day, 1986. And just 3 kilometers away stood the reason for Pripyat's existence, the Vladimir Lenin Nuclear Power Plant. 4 working reactors, 2 more under construction. One of the most powerful energy facilities on Earth. The Soviet Union was proud of Chernobyl. It represented their technological superiority, their future. But on the night of April 25, 1986, that future was about to burn. April 25, 1986, 11 p.m. Reactor number 4 is scheduled for a routine shutdown for maintenance. But the bosses have a different plan. They want to run a safety test. Here's what you need to know. A nuclear reactor is controlled by something called control rods. These rods absorb neutrons and slow down the chain reaction. Pull them out, more power. Push them in, less power. Simple, right? But the RBMK reactor had a fatal flaw. A design defect the Soviets knew about and hid. When you try to shut down an RBMK reactor quickly, there's a brief moment, just a few seconds, where power actually increases before it drops. It's called a positive void coefficient. Engineers knew this, but the operators that night, they had no idea. Leading the test, Anatoly Dyatlov, brilliant, arrogant, demanding. He wanted this test done fast. His crew, Alexander Akimov and Leonid Toptunov, both experienced, both about to make decisions they'd regret for the rest of their very short lives. By 1:23 a.m. on April 26th, the reactor is running at extremely low power. Too low. The test requires more power, so they start pulling out control rods. Too many control rods. The reactor becomes unstable. Toptunov sees the danger. He warns Dyatlov, "We should stop." Dyatlov's response, "Continue. That's an order." At 01:23:40, power starts to surge, not slowly, exponentially. In seconds, it goes from 200 megawatts to 33,000 megawatts. 100 times normal operating power. Akimov screams, "Shut it down! AZ-5! That's the emergency shutdown button. Push it and all control rods slam into the reactor core at once. It should stop the reaction. Toptunov hits the button. But remember that fatal flaw? For a few seconds, inserting the rods actually increases power. And at this level of instability, a few seconds is all it takes. 01:23:58. The core explodes. 2 explosions, actually. The first is a steam explosion. The water inside flash boils, creating pressure equal to 100 tons of TNT. The second explosion seconds later is even worse. The reactor core itself, 200 tons of uranium and graphite, blasts through the roof like a nuclear volcano. The 1,000-ton concrete and steel lid covering the reactor, blown off like a bottle cap. Radioactive fuel rods, exposed to open air, burning at 2,000 degrees Celsius, shooting radiation and debris 2 kilometers into the sky. But here's the terrifying part. Inside the control room, they don't believe it. Anatoly Dyatlov stands in the destroyed control room, covered in dust. Someone says, "The core has exploded." Dyatlov's response, "You're mistaken. It's not possible. An RBMK reactor cannot explode. The radiation meters in the control room have a maximum reading, 3.6 roentgens per hour. Every single meter is maxed out, pegged at 3.6. Dyatlov sees this and says, "Not great, not terrible." He has no idea. The actual radiation level? 20,000 roentgens per hour, enough to kill you in minutes. At 01:28 a.m., 4 minutes after the explosion, the first fire truck arrives. Pripyat Fire Station, Unit 2, led by Lieutenant Vladimir Pravik and Sergeant Vasily Ignatenko, 23 and 25 years old, both married. Vasily's wife, Lyudmila, is pregnant. They see a building on fire, debris everywhere, and on the roof of the adjacent turbine hall, chunks of what looks like black graphite, glowing red hot. They don't know it's the reactor core, pieces of the most radioactive material on Earth. They grab their hoses and start climbing. No one told them about radiation. Their Geiger counters are basic. They can't measure levels this high. So they use their hands. They kick the graphite. They pick it up and throw it off the roof. One firefighter later said it felt heavy and warm, like holding a piece of the sun. Each piece of graphite is emitting 20,000 roentgens per hour. Touching it for a few seconds is a death sentence. They spend hours up there. By the time the fire is under control, 28 firefighters have received lethal doses of radiation. They just don't know it yet. By 5 a.m., the visible fire is out. Vasily Ignatenko stumbles down the ladder. His hands are burned. His face is red. He's vomiting. His colleagues say he'll be fine. Just smoke inhalation. But Lyudmila, his wife, sees him at the hospital. She'll later say, he looked strange. His eyes were a different color. The Pripyat hospital has never seen radiation poisoning before. The doctors think it's burns, regular burns. They don't have medication for acute radiation syndrome. They don't even know what it is. Within 12 hours, these men's bodies will start to break down from the inside. Within 2 weeks, some of them will be unrecognizable. Let's talk about what radiation actually does to you, because this is important. Radiation is invisible, tasteless, odorless. You can't feel it, but it's destroying you at the molecular level. Your body is made of cells. Inside every cell is DNA, the blueprint that tells your cells how to function. Radiation tears through DNA like bullets through paper. At low doses, your body can repair the damage. At high doses, your cells can't divide, can't heal, can't function. The firefighters on that roof absorb doses between 5 and 20 grays. For context, 5 grays is enough to kill 50% of people within 30 days. 20 grays? You have a week. Maybe. This is called acute radiation syndrome, and it happens in stages. Stage 1, you feel fine. Maybe nauseous. You think you'll recover. That lasts a day or two. Stage 2, your bone marrow stops producing blood cells. Your immune system collapses, your skin starts to slough off. Internal bleeding begins. Stage 3. There is no stage 3. There's just death. And while those firefighters are dying in the hospital, the people of Pripyat are waking up. April 26th, 7 a.m. Children are eating breakfast, getting ready for school, playing outside. A beautiful spring morning. But above them, invisible, is a radioactive cloud containing cesium-137, strontium-90, plutonium-239, elements that will remain deadly for thousands of years. And no one is telling them, because Moscow doesn't know, or maybe they do, and they're choosing silence. At 8 a.m., local officials are in an emergency meeting. They know there's been an accident, but Moscow hasn't authorized an evacuation, so they decide, say nothing, keep people calm, don't cause panic. A couple gets married that afternoon. Kids ride bikes, teenagers play soccer. Every breath they take is filling their lungs with radioactive particles. Every hour they stay, their cancer risk increases, and they have no idea. By 6 p.m. on April 26th, radiation levels in Pripyat are 600 times higher than normal. The reactor core is still exposed, still burning, still pumping poison into the air. The firefighters who saved the city are dying in agony, and the Soviet government has made a decision. Tell no one. The people of Pripyat have 36 hours left in their homes. 36 hours before they'll be forced to leave everything behind. Forever. But right now they don't know that, because the truth is more dangerous than the radiation. What happened next wasn't just incompetence, it was a cover-up, a lie that would cost thousands of lives, and it started at the very top. On April 26, 1986, Soviet leader Mikhail Gorbachev was told there was a minor fire at the Chernobyl power plant. He didn't know the reactor core was exposed, spewing radiation across Europe. The truth was buried under layers of bureaucracy. While officials downplayed the crisis, the city of Pripyat lived on, oblivious. A wedding took place with smoke from the reactor visible in the background. Children played in radioactive fallout. The government stayed silent. By the afternoon, top scientist Valery Legasov arrived. He immediately saw the catastrophe. The reactor core was burning, threatening to contaminate the continent. He identified 3 nightmare scenarios: a prolonged radioactive smoke plume, a massive steam explosion from water pools beneath the reactor, and the contamination of the water supply for 30 million people. The most immediate threat was the steam explosion. The water pools had to be drained. The valves were manual, located in a flooded, highly radioactive basement. 3 men volunteered for the suicide mission: Alexei Ananenko, Valery Bespalov, and Boris Baranov. They knew the mission was likely fatal. Wading through chest-deep radioactive water in near darkness, they found and turned the valves, draining the pools and preventing a far greater disaster. Miraculously, 2 of the 3 men survived for many years. 41 hours after the explosion, Moscow finally ordered the evacuation of Pripyat. Residents were told it was temporary for just 3 days. They left their homes, their pets, their lives behind, never to return. One night, 25 buses evacuated 50,000 people in 3 hours, leaving Pripyat a ghost city. But the cover-up was blown. On April 28th, a Swedish nuclear plant detected the radiation, forcing the Soviet Union to admit the accident to the world. The lie was exposed, and the largest emergency response in human history was about to begin. Previously on Chernobyl, the disaster they tried to hide. A reactor exploded, a government lied, a city evacuated, and the world finally discovered the truth. But the disaster was far from over. The reactor was still burning, still releasing radiation, and stopping it would require something the world had never seen before: an army of ordinary men sent to fight an invisible enemy. April 28, 1986. The world knows about Chernobyl, but knowing about it and stopping it are 2 very different things. Inside Reactor 4, 190 tons of nuclear fuel are burning at over 2,000 degrees Celsius. Every hour, it pumps radioactive particles into the atmosphere: iodine-131, cesium-137, plutonium-239, enough radiation to make large parts of Europe uninhabitable. Valery Legasov has a plan: smother the core, bury it, drop enough material on top of it to cut off oxygen, absorb neutrons and stop the reaction. Sand, boron, lead, thousands of tons drop from helicopters directly onto the burning core. The Soviet military mobilizes helicopter crews, Mi-8 transport helicopters, flown by experienced pilots, many of them Afghan war veterans, men who've flown combat missions. But this is different. They're not dodging bullets. They're flying into radiation. April 28th, 10 a.m. The first helicopter takes off. The plan: hover directly over the exposed reactor core at an altitude of 200 meters and drop bags of sand and boron. It sounds simple. It's not. The heat rising from the core creates massive updrafts. The helicopter bucks and shakes like it's in a storm. The radiation is so intense that the pilot's instruments malfunction. Radios crackle with static. And the Geiger counters? They're screaming so loud the pilots just turn them off. The pilot fights to hold position as the crew chief pushes out bags of sand. Every second above that core, the crew is absorbing radiation equivalent to hundreds of chest X-rays. They land. The pilot's hands are shaking. His face is red. Radiation burn. He's absorbed 15 Roentgens in a single flight. The maximum safe annual dose for a nuclear worker is 5 Roentgens. He just took 3 years' worth in 10 minutes. And he has to fly again tomorrow. For 5 days, the helicopters fly. Over 600 flights. They drop 5,000 tons of sand, boron, lead, and clay. The radiation is so intense that one helicopter's rotor blades clip the reactor building's crane cable and crash. The crew dies instantly, but the flights continue. By May the 2nd, the core is partially covered. But there's a new problem. It's not cooling down. It's getting hotter. The sand and lead are creating an insulating blanket, trapping the heat. The core temperature rises to 2,600 degrees Celsius. It's melting through the concrete foundation. While the core burns below, there's another crisis: the roofs. The explosion scattered highly radioactive debris across the roofs of the other reactor buildings. Chunks of graphite from the core itself, This debris has to be removed. The Soviets try robots first, remote-controlled bulldozers. Within minutes, the radiation fries their circuits. The cameras fail. The motors seize. The robots die. The radiation is too intense. One area of the roof, called Masha, is emitting 8,000 roentgens per hour, enough to kill you in 50 seconds. The engineers realize machines can't do this job. So they make a decision that will haunt the Soviet Union for decades. They need men. The government issues orders to military bases across the USSR. Send soldiers, reservists, young men on mandatory service. They're told it's a patriotic duty. Most of them have no idea what they're actually going to do. The buses arrive carrying soldiers with an average age of 20. They're told, you'll be cleaning debris from a roof. You'll work in 90-second shifts. No longer. What they're not told is that those 90 seconds will give them a lifetime dose of radiation. They're issued lead aprons that weigh 30 kilograms, respirators, gloves, boots. It doesn't really protect them, but it makes them feel safer. And that's what matters to the commanders. The first man steps onto the roof. He's given a shovel. His job: scoop up radioactive graphite, run to the edge, throw it into the destroyed reactor and get off the roof. 90 seconds. His dosimeter clicks rapidly. He scoops, runs, throws. The alarm goes off. 90 seconds are up. He runs off the roof. He's just absorbed a lethal dose of radiation. He's 19 years old. And then the next man goes, and the next. An assembly line of human beings. They called them biorobots, because that's what they were. Living machines doing a job that machines couldn't survive. 3,500 men, 90 seconds each. Some vomit inside their respirators from fear and radiation sickness. But they keep going. One biorobot later said, I was on that roof for 47 seconds. 35 years later, I still have nightmares. It takes weeks and thousands of 90-second shifts, but they clear the roof. The job is done. The price? Unknown. Independent studies suggest 10 to 20% of these men died from radiation-related illness within 10 years. They were disposable. While soldiers clean the roof, beneath the reactor, another crisis is developing. The core is melting through the concrete foundation. If it reaches the groundwater, it will contaminate the water supply for 30 million people. The plan: freeze the ground solid by tunneling underneath Reactor 4. They need miners, the best in the Soviet Union. 400 miners are recruited. They're told it's a critical mission, double pay. What they're not told is they'll be digging underneath a melting nuclear reactor. The conditions are horrific. The tunnel temperature is 50 degrees Celsius, 122 Fahrenheit. The air is thick with dust and radiation. The miners strip down, some working in just their underwear. It's too hot for protective gear. They dig 24 hours a day. By mid-June, the tunnel is complete. It's an engineering miracle and a death sentence for many of the men who built it. The refrigeration system is installed. They flip the switch. Success. Except it's too late. The core has already started to cool on its own. The system was never actually used. Of the 400 miners, a quarter of them were dead within 10 years. By June, the immediate crisis is stabilizing. But the radiation isn't going anywhere. The Soviet government creates an exclusion zone, 30 kilometers in all directions, permanent evacuation, 350,000 people told to leave forever. And then comes the cruelest order: no pets. They're contaminated. Soldiers go door to door, shooting dogs, cats, and livestock. One soldier said, "The hardest thing I ever did in my life was shoot a little girl's dog while she watched from the bus window." By the end of 1986, over 600,000 men have worked at Chernobyl. They stabilized the reactor and prevented a continental catastrophe. The Soviet government calls them heroes, gives them medals, but behind the propaganda the truth is darker. These men are dying. Leukemia, thyroid cancer, lung cancer. The government downplays it, because to admit the truth would be to admit the disaster was far worse than they claimed. Official Soviet records state 31 deaths. Independent studies suggest anywhere from 4,000 to 93,000. We may never know for sure. Today the liquidators still gather, old men now, They compare scars and mourn friends who didn't make it. And they ask a question no one can answer. Were we heroes? Or were we victims? The reactor is stable now, buried under a massive tomb called the sarcophagus, built by liquidators who knew they were signing their own death warrants. But the story doesn't end here. Radiation doesn't just kill in weeks or months. It kills over generations, and the true cost of Chernobyl is still being counted. Imagine a world where one mistake, one single error, could poison an entire continent for centuries. A world where the truth was a more dangerous substance than radioactive fallout. This isn't a sci-fi movie. This is the real story of Chernobyl, the disaster they tried to hide. April 26, 1986. Pripyat, a model Soviet city in Ukraine. Families are sleeping. Children are dreaming. Just a few kilometers away at the Chernobyl Nuclear Power Plant, a team of engineers begins a late-night safety test on reactor number 4. This test was supposed to prove how safe Soviet nuclear technology was. Instead, it triggered a catastrophe that would change the world forever. What went wrong? It was a perfect storm of human error and flawed design. The reactor, known as an RBMK, had a dangerous design flaw. At low power, it became incredibly unstable. The operators, under pressure and behind schedule, disabled crucial safety systems. They were pushing the reactor to its absolute limit, unaware they were standing on the edge of a nuclear volcano. At 1:23 a.m., the test went horribly wrong. A massive power surge caused a steam explosion that blew the 2,000-ton lid right off the reactor. Seconds later, a second, more powerful explosion ignited the graphite core and sent a plume of radioactive material soaring into the night sky. This was not just a fire. It was a nuclear inferno, spewing out radiation equivalent to 400 Hiroshima bombs. In the immediate aftermath, chaos and denial reigned. The operators in the control room couldn't believe what their instruments were telling them. They reported that the reactor was intact, that it was just a fire on the roof. The first firefighters who arrived on the scene had no idea what they were walking into. They were sent to fight a fire, armed with little more than standard equipment. They weren't told it was a radioactive blaze. These brave men, the first heroes of Chernobyl, absorbed fatal doses of radiation within minutes. They were the first to sacrifice their lives, unknowingly, to contain a disaster the world wasn't ready for. As dawn broke, the city of Pripyat woke up to a strange, metallic taste in the air and an eerie, beautiful glow above the plant. People went about their day. Children played outside. Weddings went on. No one told them they were being showered with invisible, deadly particles. The Soviet government's first reaction was not to protect its people, but to protect its secrets. The state-controlled media reported a minor accident. The entire city of Pripyat, with its 50,000 residents, was kept in the dark for a full 36 hours before the evacuation order was finally given. They were told it was temporary, just for a few days. They were instructed to bring only what was necessary. So they left behind their homes, their pets, their entire lives, believing they would soon return. They never did. Today, Pripyat is a ghost town, a chilling time capsule of the Soviet era, slowly being reclaimed by nature. While Pripyat was being evacuated, the world still knew nothing. But you can't hide a radioactive cloud. 2 days after the explosion, workers at a nuclear plant in Sweden, over 1,000 kilometers away, detected abnormally high levels of radiation. They traced it back, not to their own facility, but to the Soviet Union. The secret was out. Faced with undeniable international evidence, Moscow finally admitted that a major accident had occurred. The cover-up had failed, and now the cleanup began. It was a war fought not with guns, but with shovels and lead shielding. Hundreds of thousands of liquidators, soldiers, miners, engineers, and volunteers were mobilized from across the Soviet Union. They were tasked with the impossible, containing an exploded nuclear reactor. Miners dug a tunnel beneath the melting core to prevent it from contaminating the groundwater. Helicopter pilots flew daring missions through clouds of intense radiation to drop sand, lead, and boron onto the burning reactor to extinguish the fire. On the roof, a team of biorobots, as they were grimly called, had to clear away chunks of highly radioactive graphite. They could only work for 40 to 90 seconds at a time before their lifetime dose of radiation was reached. Every second on that roof was a gamble with their lives. These liquidators were the unsung heroes who prevented an even greater catastrophe. Many would later suffer from severe health problems or die from radiation-related illnesses. Their sacrifice saved millions. In the months and years that followed, the true scale of the disaster began to emerge. A 30-kilometer exclusion zone was established around the plant, a dead zone where human life is still not safe. The radioactive fallout contaminated vast areas of Ukraine, Belarus, and Russia, poisoning farmland, forests, and rivers. The long-term health consequences have been devastating, with a significant increase in cancer rates, especially thyroid cancer in children. The official Soviet narrative blamed the operators, painting them as reckless rogues. While human error was a factor, the truth was far more complex. A secret KGB report, declassified years later, revealed that the authorities knew about the RBMK reactor's design flaws long before the accident, but chose to do nothing. Chernobyl wasn't just an accident, it was the inevitable result of a system built on secrecy and a disregard for safety. The disaster had a profound impact, not just on the environment and public health, but on history itself. For many, Chernobyl exposed the fatal weaknesses of the Soviet system. The lies, the cover-up, and the inability to protect its own citizens shattered the people's trust in their government. Some historians argue that the transparency forced by Chernobyl was a key factor that accelerated the collapse of the Soviet Union just 5 years later. Today, the reactor is encased in a massive steel structure called the New Safe Confinement, an engineering marvel designed to contain the remaining radioactive material for the next 100 years. The exclusion zone has become an unlikely wildlife sanctuary, a place where nature is thriving in the absence of humans. It serves as a stark reminder of our planet's resilience, but also of the long shadow our mistakes can cast. The story of Chernobyl is a story of failure, but it is also a story of incredible courage, sacrifice, and resilience. It's a cautionary tale about the dangers of unchecked power, the price of secrets, and our responsibility to learn from the past. It forces us to ask difficult questions about our reliance on technology and the moral compromises we are willing to make in the name of progress. It reminds us that the truth, no matter how terrifying, must never be hidden. Thank you for watching. If you found this story as compelling as I did, please like, subscribe, and hit the bell icon so you don't miss our next deep dive into the events that shaped our world.